Also, okay, wait, hold on. What do I'm gonna get rid of some of these snails. Oh, I looked into snails yesterday because I never really knew much about snails at all. Like I obviously know like what they look like, and they're kind of slimy, and like some parts of the world consider like a cuisine. However, yeah, there's some interesting things I didn't really consider about snails. One of them being like the whirl. Like snails for the most part have a clockwise swirl to them, I guess, and then there's like some that have like a counterclockwise spiral to them. And I remember there's one, I think it was called like Jeremy the snail. The snail's name was Jeremy for some reason, and Jeremy, and then it had like a counterclockwise swirl to it. And I believe the scientists were trying to like figure out if they can like pair it with another counterclockwise snail and see if it can make like counterclockwise baby snails. But every time they tried, it would always be a clockwise snail for whatever reason. It was something to do with like recessive genes, I believe. But yeah, that's like a really interesting thing, because like one of the defining aspects most people would point to, I guess, regarding snails would probably be the swirl, obviously. But it's just something that I hadn't really considered, which is like which way does the swirl go? And yeah, apparently for snails, it's mostly clockwise. And I believe that is the case for like a lot of things in nature as well, if I remember correctly. Like I believe vines, like the plant, will usually tend to swirl in a specific way. I believe clockwise as well, I think. There's oh, I think it's called like nutation. I think it's called like nutation biology, not notation, nutation. And I believe that's like the sort of like encompassing term for like rotational direction. Oh, I think a more encompassing term is like chirality or chirality. I'm not sure how to pronounce it entirely, but I think chirality refers to the direction of a rotation when it comes to something like a biological system. Am I gonna die to these roaches? You know. So yeah, that's something. Oh, I believe like most people's hair also kind of like whirls in a specific direction as well. Like I didn't know this for a while, which is like, for example, your bangs will probably sway a certain way naturally, or like the top of your head kind of like swirls or curls in a like kind of specific way. And yeah, that's really interesting. Can I go up there? I don't think so. Yeah, snails in general, very, very interesting. Again, it's because did I go over this in my previous recording? I'm not sure, but basically the other day, was it the other day? It might have been yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Yesterday I was like walking to, did I talk about this? I think I talked about this in my previous recording, but I'll mention it briefly again. Like, I was on a long sidewalk path, and then all alongside the sidewalk were a bunch of like plants, and I believe the previous day it was like raining a little bit. So, like as I was walking on this very very long sidewalk and very straight and direct as well, like I noticed on the side nearby the soil there's just a bunch of snail trails. So I could kind of see the mucus, I guess. I'm not sure what it's called, the slime, and it's sort of giving off a reflective shimmer and quality to it from the sun, obviously. And so literally the entire sidewalk was just like a bunch of patterns of these snail trails, and each one felt like it was distinct from another. Well, some of them were similar, but most of them felt very distinct from another. So some like the snail trails had a very how do you describe it? A very sort of like, it almost looks like a network node graph, where it's just like a lot of like intersecting lines and stuff like that. And then some of the trails looked more like distinct geometry, like triangles and things like that. There's one that I saw that was like a very, very almost perfect oval, like a half oval. That was really cool. And yeah, there was just like a bunch of different configurations or patterns of these trails, and it almost felt like each snail was exhibiting, like in my head, it kind of felt like each snail was exhibiting their pattern for like a fashion show or something like that. So like snail A was exhibiting their sort of like oval like pattern, and snail B was exhibiting their like triangle pattern. Snail C was exhibiting their like network graph looking pattern, and so on. And I think part of it was because like either earlier that day or the previous day, I watched a video on the history of lace, like lace making, and I mean, that was a really fascinating video. But like the snail trails looked a lot like lace. So, oh, and also I remember, so I kept walking, and then by the end of the sidewalk I noticed there was one trail where like it just sort of like went off in a random direction, like it ventured off into parts unknown, into lands unknown. And I was like considering where the snail could have went and what its fate could have been, because like most of the trails that I saw along the sidewalk, it kind of just like started from the soil and then kind of ended back or looped back to the soil area or the plant section. So like the snail would venture out a little bit, and for whatever reason it would just like circle back into the soil. And this was the case for like all the patterns pretty much, for whatever reason. But then like by the end of the sidewalk there was like one snail trail where it like ventured off into this like more of the sidewalk or like concrete section. And I think directly after that was just like a road or something like that. So to me this felt like the snail that dared, or that decided to venture further. And yeah, I'm not sure what happened to it, but it's interesting to consider, I guess. And yeah, do I want to go over I'll talk about it again, because I don't know if I'm gonna release the prior video. But basically, yesterday was a very interesting day overall. It also happened to be Friday the 13th, and Well, I remember distinctly waking up yesterday in the morning, and for whatever reason, I was feeling that today might be an uncharacteristically lucky day for me. And I know that sounds kind of absurd, but in my head, it kind of feels like a lot of times things happen in like a somewhat reversed way for me sometimes, or at least that's like how my thought process goes for some things. And so, not entirely, but like somewhat, a little bit. But so essentially, like for whatever reason, I felt like yesterday would be, if not like lucky, at least there would be like something a little bit interesting about it. And okay. And I mean, there was a lot of interesting things that happened, but one of the things was like I received a video recommendation online from my algorithm. It was just titled 444. Or like immediately it started off with the person being like, so I don't know you and you don't know me, but I'm gonna do your reading now. And so that's what they did. I believe one was like a tarot, and then one was something called like an oracle deck, which I'm not like entirely familiar with. But yeah, so that was cool. But the more neat part for me was the way they would do their interpretations of the readings and the cards, and then there'd be like environmental stimuli that would occur as they were reading, and then it would be used as a sort of like influence or factor or weight to the reading. So what I mean is like they'd pull a card, and for example, the first card they pulled was the Nine of Pentacles, and I don't really entirely remember what they said about it, but there was a moment where like either like an animal passed by, or like a bike passed by, or like somebody outside was talking about something, or there was like a truck, like a garbage truck sort of moving around and making a lot of noise, and essentially the person would use those environmental cues as maybe like affirmation or denial or some other thing for the reading. Basically use it as like auxiliary kind of input or like an auxiliary kind of factor for the reading. And yeah, that's really awesome because it's like reassuring for me personally, because sometimes I will definitely be in a very distinctive kind of headspace where that kind of happens for me as well. And so for example, there'll be certain occasions where I'll like I mean literally the other day, like last week, I have this big box of arts and crafts material in my room, and it has a bunch of stuff in it, like beads, miscellaneous shapes, and it has like letter beads as well. And what happened was I was just like walking around my room, and then I accidentally happened to like knock it over, and then the entire bag just kind of like spilled all over the floor. And immediately I like grabbed my phone to take a picture, and I was just like sort of I have the picture used as my phone wallpaper currently, and I'll just like look at it from time to time. And what I'm taking note of is like the sort of like the shapes, either the shapes or like where certain beads land relative to another, or where like certain letter beads land, and maybe they'll like spell out certain patterns or strings of words or configurations. And so it feels like I'm definitely, to me, I'm deriving a lot of meaning from something like this. And the random seeming like happenstance that sort of triggered it or kicked it off, it felt very valuable to me. And I know some people, this is not like a entirely like unheard of thing, which, like, the obvious case would be like a book falling from a bookshelf, and then it will like, the book will open to a certain page, and then the person may be encouraged to look at the page and like pick out a specific passage or sentence or string that they sort of like happen to land their eyes on immediately, and then maybe do like an interpretation from that. So again, I don't think this kind of thing is like that strange or weird, depending on your outlook of things. Oh, the glove. Yeah, definitely. The glove is really useful. But I'm only speaking about this in my case because I wasn't entirely aware of this sort of thing for a while. And so, for example, I was like hospitalized before, and I remember talking to one of the clinicians or doctors about something like this. I was like, yeah, sometimes I'll just like drop some things in my room accidentally, like a deck of cards, for example, and they'll land in a way that's very specific, and then I'll like derive meaning of it, or like they'll drop and then somebody outside will like shout something, or there'll be like a car that honks, and then in my head I'll be like, yeah, they're definitely like affirming or denying like certain meanings that play out in my interpretation or consciousness. And they kind of gave like like a steady, like a slightly, I wouldn't say like a slightly perplexed but also steady and knowing look, because I feel like they probably had similar patients that have described similar things. I don't know if they've experienced it themselves, but I think the term that they ascribe to it, as well as some like online sources or like like public sources might ascribe to this, would be something like magical thinking. And essentially that is what it is, supposedly. Like, magical thinking is when somebody supposedly ascribes meaning to otherwise insignificant or non-meaning holding stimuli or events or whatever. So yeah, but that's kind of like what I was familiar with for a while, so it was sort of weird in a way. Like, for me it was a little bit discouraging to think about it in that kind of way, because it feels like a very natural thing to me sometimes, and I think it does for some people, but the way that it's presented in either like clinical studies or academia or even like some media portrayals, it's portrayed in a light that feels a little bit ominous or weird, or portrayed in a way that either like warrants quote unquote like help or medication, or if it's like in media, it's often represented by a character that's just like maybe a little bit too quirky, or it's like the wacky, oh they're so crazy kind of character. Like, I think it'd be more interesting if it was just, if they had more characters that presented something like the idea of magical thinking as a very, which is like normal kind of thing, and maybe it's integral to the plot, or it's used it's portrayed in a way that's just like not as dramatically emphasized. I feel like that'd be very compelling. But I think there are probably some examples out there. But yeah, I mean, like, the term itself is really funny to me. Like, okay, I'm gonna take a sip of water. Like, magical thinking feels like one of the terms in in clinical studies or academia or whatever in the field of, I don't know what you call, like neuroscience or psychology, that doesn't feel very clinical. Like you could maybe see it in the DSM-5 or whatever, and like I don't know, if I saw it pop up in the DSM or something, or manual, I'd be like, that's a very almost like fun term, like magical thinking. It almost doesn't feel like it implies a pathology that needs treatment from like my initial impression of the way it sounds or interpreted as. It almost feels like something kind of normal. Like, for example, you could say like children on a playground in school at an early age could exhibit magical thinking when they're like going through playtime, or they're like role playing as like different characters or something, or they're like actively using their imagination to play out miscellaneous scenarios. Like, I feel like some could argue that that definitely involves an aspect of magical thinking, perhaps, as used in this sort of like traditionally clinical sense. But I guess it's like once a lot of people reach like a certain age, it's maybe considered a little bit of a thing that like warrants treatment for whatever reason. And for the record, like the medication they provided doesn't feel like it did really that much. So yeah, I just don't know. Like, I think it is one of those things. It's a bit stereotypical, but like one of those things where it's like, oh, if this was a culture where like the context of the thing is like integrated or used in like a daily or ritualized setting, normal setting, then it would be fine, obviously. But it's more so in certain places of the world, it's viewed as like a concerning kind of trait sometimes. And like, again, it's the way it's like, if I were to like compare it to media, or bring up like a media example, something that immediately jumps to mind is My Little Pony, where Pinkie Pie, I feel, is obviously the one that exhibits something like I mean, okay, I feel like she exhibits a lot of things, but magical thinking, I feel like, is one of the things that is like front and center to her, and to her like characteristic and personality trait. But again, it's like she is this very over the top pony, and it's very charming overall, but like that kind of thing you almost have to like present it via a character that is over the top like that. Otherwise it feels like weird and uncanny for most people, I think, if not portrayed in that way. So I think it's fine, but if I were to bring up another character in that show that I feel like does a little bit more of a subtle portrayal, or like a softer portrayal of something like magical thinking, it would probably be Trixie, the Great and Powerful, by the way. And I don't think this is as obvious, but like, think about it. For example, like Trixie lives in like a traveling wagon with a bunch of miscellaneous trinkets and artifacts, and they might all be like knockoffs and stuff, but I think to her it feels very authentic and applicable, and I feel like she uses these things in her shows in a very meaningful and direct way. And okay, it's not so much the shows, but like, for example, I feel like, I don't know if this happens on screen, but off screen, I feel like Trixie in her wagon sometimes will like knock over something. Like she might accidentally knock over like a magical ball prop and a deck of cards, and they might like all scatter on the floor. And then Trixie, I don't think Trixie will be like, oh, this obviously means this, or this is suggesting me to do that. But then Trixie will have like an offhand comment or side comment about the situation that's very sarcastic. So she'll be like, oh, she'll be like thinking about something and then knock over a bunch of cards and a crystal ball, and she'll be like, oh, huh, thanks, something of something, oh, like, thanks, Nine of Pentacles, like, I guess this is what you wanted to elucidate, like, what do you want to show me next, crystal ball? And then there will be like a bird passing by, or there will be like sunlight that like randomly shines through in that moment and reflects off the crystal ball, and then she'll be like, huh, what a coincidence. I guess it is like telling me to like play the next show in Saddle Arabia or whatever. So like in that way, I don't think it is she's like consciously exhibiting magical thinking for like in her own stream of consciousness, but I think she exhibits it in a less direct and sort like in an indirect kind of way. So I think for her talent for magical thinking is in a way sort of like indirect, or like secondary, or like non-primary, but it exhibits itself in a way that's very natural as well, and in some cases maybe even more natural, or I think in some ways more natural than Pinkie Pie, because again, Pinkie Pie is fine, but it's just like a little bit over the top sometimes, and yeah, it was like I think Trixie could portray like the symptoms, so to speak, or the characteristics of something like magical thinking in a more subdued way that I find very fascinating to think about. So yeah, that was my tangent. That wasn't even my main point. So the video had a lot of interesting moments to it. I'm not going to go over everything. And one of the things that was emphasized in the video is that like whoever was watching could receive a lot of like reward or whatever, or like prosperity or something. I think it has to do with the number like 888 for whatever reason. Did I just see something? Anyway, so I was considering like what that could be, because nothing really pops up to mind immediately when I'm considering like what could be a quote-unquote like reward or whatever in my life at the moment. And yeah, I was like considering it for a little bit yesterday, and I was thinking, oh, it is a bit cliche, but it is probably like the video itself finding its way to me and my algorithm, because I do feel like especially the way that the person did the interpretations and used environmental stimuli as like a weight or factor in her interpretations, that spoke to me quite a bit, and it felt like a very reassuring kind of moment for me, because it's not, I don't like, I'm not always in environments where that feels like it's just like a natural kind of thing. For the most part, I think a lot of people might give you a slightly weird or off look if like I were to describe some of the things that like I ascribe meaning to or interpret sometimes. And yeah, I mean the way that the person in the video was talking about these things and like portraying these things didn't felt like it was like overly heavy-handed or like wacky or crazy or anything. Like it just felt like a normal person doing like an interpretation, or not normal. I mean, like I don't know if they want to be considered normal, but like an everyday person kind of just like doing somebody's readings. And this is not something to be like I don't think it's something that needs like diagnosis, for example, as some people in a more like clinical setting might consider it may warrant, for some people. And yeah, it was very reassuring overall to encounter somebody or video where somebody's exhibiting that kind of characteristic. Wait, I didn't have any saves? I guess it's fine. That's like a decent starting point.